"She's really hugging that man? In that dress?" someone muttered, as the bride dashed down the aisle, arms open wide toward an elderly stranger in worn shoes. Guests exchanged glances, unsettled. Then, without warning, 12 uniformed Marines marched in, heels synchronized, saluting the bride as if she were royalty. Type, "Kindness speaks louder," if you felt chills. Welcome to TH. Let's uncover what really happened in life. That morning, the early autumn sunlight stretched softly across the cobbled streets of Old Albany, as if the sky itself were offering a quiet blessing for something sacred. Inside the historic St. Elmo's Church, the soft sound of the organ floated through the air, mingling with the scent of white lilies that lined the rows of dark wooden pews. Everything had been arranged with care. Silk ribbons draped along the aisle, wreaths hand-woven petal by petal, light from the stained glass windows casting gentle, dream-like hues onto the marble floor. Claire Watson, a 29-year-old bride with softly curled dark blonde hair, stood behind the waiting room door of the church, her hands gently clutching a bouquet of white tulips, the flower she had loved since childhood. Today was the day she would become the wife of Jake McKinley, her best friend, her loving companion, and a brave firefighter who knew her better than the pages of her own journals. But just moments before that sacred hour, something unexpected happened. A murmur stirred among the guests seated in the front pews when an elderly man, weathered in appearance, stepped through the main doors of the church. He wore a worn-out suit, ironed carefully, though it couldn't hide the age in its fabric. His shoes, faded by time, had clearly been polished with effort. He walked slowly, head slightly bowed, his eyes shifting cautiously around the room as if unsure whether he truly belonged in such a refined place. A guest leaned toward the person next to them and whispered, "Don't tell me she invited him to the wedding." The voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to be overheard by those nearby. Some eyes turned, visibly surprised. A few frowned. Others looked away, choosing silence over confrontation. No one spoke aloud, but the discomfort spread, colder than the autumn breeze slipping through the cracked open door. From the bride's room, Claire glimpsed him through the narrow window and froze. Her eyes widened and her hands tightened around the bouquet, as if her heart had just skipped a beat. She recognized that walk, the slightly tousled silver hair, the man who often sat by the bus stop near the bakery where she had worked for nearly a decade. Without hesitation, she placed the bouquet on the table, lifted the hem of her wedding dress, and stepped out of the room. The makeup artists hadn't yet asked a thing before the white gown fluttered past like a breeze down the hallway. Voices called out in alarm behind her, "Claire! Wait! It's time!" But Claire didn't turn back. She walked swiftly through the foyer, past the bewildered eyes of guests. Her white gown floated lightly with every determined step, not a second of hesitation in her pace. As she neared him, the old man seemed to brace himself, beginning to step back. But before he could retreat, Claire wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a dramatic hug, not staged, not for show, just honest, wordless emotion. A single tear slipped down Claire's cheek, streaking the delicate makeup done less than an hour ago. She said nothing, simply rested her head on his shoulder, as if no one else existed, as if it were just the two of them, one who had given without asking, and one who had received without ever saying thank you. A quiet sob broke from one of the nearby pews, though no one could say whose it was. Perhaps her mother, who always said Claire was too soft on strangers. Perhaps a former friend who once laughed at her habit of bringing pastries to unknown men each morning. But in that moment, no one remembered what they had once said. And then, as if in a slow-motion reel, The great double doors at the back of the church began to open, letting in a stream of noonday sunlight. It gleamed against polished black shoes, crisp military hats, and white-gloved hands held in perfect formation. 12 uniformed men entered, each step measured and majestic. They formed two lines, creating an honor guard down the center of the church aisle. The entire space seemed to hold its breath. Claire still stood beside the silver-haired man, her eyes wide, lips parted, but silent. She didn't know who they were. She had never seen these men before. One stepped forward, face stoic, gaze reverent. He stopped in front of Claire and the old man, then raised his hand to his brow in a crisp salute. "On behalf of the 4th Marine Battalion," he said, voice firm and clear, "we are here to honor the woman who kept a hero alive in silence for 6 years." Claire fell silent. Beside her, the old man gently bowed his head again, not speaking a word. Inside the church, the stillness hung like a veil. Somewhere, someone dropped a wineglass. The sound of shattering cut through the hush like a bell. And then, finally, it became clear to everyone. This was no ordinary wedding. This was something larger, an unspoken gratitude, a quiet act of recognition for someone who had never asked to be seen. And it all began with a hug. A simple embrace between a woman and a man the world knew as homeless. But not to her. To Claire, he was the man who received her morning pastry, the one who once left her a handwritten note, the one she had always looked at with kindness, not because he was someone, but because he was human. Before Claire Watson became the bride that would make 12 U.S. Marines march into a church in perfect formation, she was just a regular woman working at a small bakery tucked away on Elmwood Street in Albany. Windmill Bakery wasn't a famous place. It never made headlines, never saw a flood of tourists. But for the locals, it was a place where the smell of warm bread greeted them each morning, where sweet raisin buns and sugar-dusted cinnamon rolls lined the glass case by 6 a.m. sharp. People didn't just come for the pastries. They came for Claire, the young baker who greeted everyone with a sincere smile, whether it was raining or snowing. Each morning, Claire arrived at 4:15 a.m., before dawn, before birds stirred. She worked in silence, so the first sounds of the day weren't complaints, but the rhythmic kneading of dough and the soft release of cinnamon into the air. But there was something most didn't know. Something Claire never told anyone for years. At exactly 5:45 a.m., when the first batch of pastries was fresh from the oven, Claire would take a warm raisin bun, wrap it carefully in wax paper, pour a cup of steaming coffee, and step out the back door of the bakery. On a wooden bench near the Jefferson Street bus stop, she would place the meal down. Along with it, a small handwritten note, wishing you a peaceful morning. No one told her to do it. There were no cameras, no social media to brag about it. For over 6 years, the man who received those offerings, an old man with silver hair and a threadbare coat, never said a word. He never begged, never smiled awkwardly. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes just a glance of gratitude, before turning his eyes back to the street. To others, he was just a homeless man on the bench. But to Claire, he was something else. A quiet reminder each morning that kindness doesn't need a reason. One morning, a co-worker happened to spot Claire returning from her routine. She laughed, and the gossip began. "She's wasting good pastries," one said behind the counter. "One day, he'll take advantage of her," said another. They weren't cruel, just unaware. It came to a head when the bakery's new manager took over. During a monthly performance review, he lowered his voice. "I hear you're doing personal charity work. I admire your heart, but some customers say it makes them uncomfortable. Claire simply smiled. I'll keep that in mind, she replied, and came in 15 minutes earlier the next day, more quietly than ever. No one could stop her. No one needed to know. Only one person mattered, the one receiving that breakfast. In December 2021, the snow came down thicker and colder than usual. One morning, Claire saw the man shivering, hands buried deep in the torn pockets of his coat. Without hesitation, she removed the gray scarf her mother had knitted for her back in high school and gently wrapped it around his neck. She said nothing, just bowed slightly and walked back. The next morning, instead of Claire's usual handwritten note, there was a different slip of paper, written in faint, trembling pencil. Thank you for seeing me as a person. Claire read the note and stood still on the icy street, heart tightening. Not out of pity, but something deeper. After 6 years of silence, he had spoken. And what he said carried more meaning than anything anyone else had ever told her. From that day on, she kept the note in her wallet, pressed between 2 old sheet music scores she once played in music school. On bad days, when someone said, "Nice people get nowhere," she would open her wallet, read that line again, and return to baking. Jake, her fiancé, was the only person she ever told. As a firefighter, he understood the power of quiet acts. Not everyone runs into burning buildings like I do, he once told her. But I believe what you do, bringing someone a pastry every morning, that's a different kind of courage. You're keeping someone alive in your own way. Claire never thought of it that way. She just believed everyone deserved to be seen, to know they still existed. And if she could start someone's morning with a little warmth, why wouldn't she? Nobody at the bakery knew. They just saw a cheerful girl who always lent a hand. A bit odd, perhaps. Nobody imagined that a simple routine could change a life. But Claire never cared about being understood. She only cared that no one be forgotten. 2 days before the wedding, Claire Watson believed everything had been arranged perfectly. She and Jake had spent months finalizing the guest list, choosing each piece of music, even debating the best way to fold the napkins for the reception. Everything was in its place, just as Claire had always lived her life. Thoughtful, simple, but deeply intentional. That day, as Claire double-checked the seating chart in the banquet hall, the event manager walked up to her, holding a cream-colored envelope with no return address. Someone just dropped this off by hand, the young woman said curiously. It's addressed only to the bride. Claire wiped her hands on her apron, took the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a plain card, no decorations, no florals, just a single sentence in careful black ink. Tomorrow, I will come. Not for the bread, but to repay a debt. No signature, no hint of identity, no clue. But the handwriting. Claire felt like she had seen it before. It reminded her of an old note, worn with time, pressed between the pages of her wallet for years. Thank you for seeing me as a person. The same slanted script, slightly shaky, yet written with deliberation, as if each letter had been considered carefully before it was set to paper. Claire didn't tell Jake, not because she was hiding anything, but because she herself didn't quite understand why her heart had begun to beat faster. Something in that card brought her peace, as if a missing piece of her life was finally about to fall into place. The next morning, the day before the wedding, Claire woke earlier than usual. She made coffee and sat by the window, watching the quiet street already tinged with golden leaves. People passed by as always, dogs leading their owners, kids pedaling off to school. But inside her, something shifted. A subtle waiting, a quiet sense that something bigger than vows or cakes or invitation cards was approaching. And then the wedding day arrived. No one at the wedding had ever seen anything like it. The bride hugging a homeless man in front of 100 well-dressed guests. But in that moment, something sacred shifted. The wedding, Claire's wedding, truly began not with music, nor with vows, but with the simple reunion of two people who had saved each other's lives without ever speaking a word. The atmosphere inside the church felt like a river held back by a dam, taut, silent, full of unspoken tension. Some guests looked ready to approach Claire, uncertain whether she needed help. Others exchanged confused glances, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. But before anyone could say a word, a new sound cut through the air, the sharp, rhythmic thrum of heavy tires rolling over cobblestone just outside the church. It was so distinct, so out of place, that time itself seemed to pause. Then, with no drama or music, the massive double doors of the church opened, not abruptly, not ceremoniously, just steadily, deliberately, like a ritual being fulfilled. And they appeared. 12 men entered in full United States Marine Corps dress blues, navy coats with polished brass buttons, gleaming shoes, white gloves, and hats perched with exacting precision. They moved in synchrony, footsteps echoing against the marble floor like a solemn drumbeat reverberating through every heart in the room. A middle-aged man led the formation. His uniform bore a brass nameplate, Captain Thomas. Without hesitation, he walked straight to where Claire stood with the elderly man, the man who, mere minutes earlier, had been whispered about as an uninvited guest. Captain Thomas stopped before them, raised his hand in a crisp salute, and spoke with a voice that carried effortlessly through the sanctuary. On behalf of Alpha Company, 4th Battalion, United States Marine Corps, we are not here today as wedding guests. We are here to honor the woman who, in silence, kept a hero alive for 6 years. The room shattered, not with noise, but with realization. Some gasped, some clutched their chests as if their hearts had skipped a beat. Claire stood motionless, eyes wide, caught between awe and disbelief. Slowly, she turned to the man beside her, and for the first time, under the light of stained glass, she saw him. Not as the quiet man from the bus stop, not as the fragile figure wrapped in an old coat, but as someone carrying a story far too heavy to be seen at first glance. Captain Thomas faced the guests and gently gestured to the man standing next to Claire. "This is Sergeant Harold Jennings, a former Marine who served in Mosul, Iraq, in 2005. During a brutal ambush, he risked his life returning to the battlefield to rescue 9 of his fellow soldiers, including me." A stunned silence fell across the pews. Eyes that had once judged him now clung to every word, searching the man's face for signs of that untold legacy. "After returning home," Thomas continued, his voice catching, "he lost his entire family in a tragic car accident. Unable to bear the pain, he withdrew from society, rejecting all military benefits, refusing medals, even the Silver Star he had rightfully earned." Another Marine stepped forward, holding a framed glass case. Inside was a gleaming Silver Star medal, and beside it, a faded photograph. A young soldier carrying another Marine on his back, through rubble and smoke. The soldier in the photo was unmistakably Harold. Younger, fierce, eyes burning with resolve. And the wounded man on his back, legs bloodied, dazed expression on his face, was none other than Captain Thomas. Thomas turned back to Harold, eyes red. "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing here today." Then he looked at Claire, and there was something deeper than respect in his gaze. something that bordered on reverence. And if it weren't for you, Claire, he might not have lived to hear these words. For 6 years, every morning, you brought breakfast and warmth to a man the world had forgotten. You didn't know his name. You didn't ask for his story. You expected nothing in return. You simply believed he deserved to be seen. A soft sob escaped from the back rows. One of the bridesmaids discreetly wiped her eyes. Even the photographer, known for capturing every flawless moment, lowered his camera, hands trembling. Harold placed his weathered hand gently over Claire's. His voice, though quiet, rang out with clarity, each word like a sacred vow. I didn't come today to ask for anything. I came to give you the last thing I have left, my truth, my gratitude, and my presence, because I know you deserve that much. Claire couldn't speak. She gripped his hand tighter, overwhelmed, not by spectacle, but by the weight of what she had just been given. And this was only the beginning. Because what Harold carried, an invisible gift forged in silence and survival, would lead them to something even more miraculous. In that moment, when Sergeant Harold Jennings's voice, thick with emotion, delivered the truth he had hidden for years, the church stood still. No one whispered. No one shifted. Only understanding, awe, and emotion lingered on every face. Claire remained by his side, her small hand held in his weathered, calloused one, hands shaped by war, loss, and years of solitude. The silence stretched, not awkwardly, but reverently, as if the world had paused to let something sacred pass through. And then, something happened that no one could have foreseen. Jake McKinley, the groom, who had been standing near the altar all along, watching every moment with a heavy gaze, stepped forward. He wore a simple black suit. No medals, no rank, no fanfare. But each step he took was grounded, steady. The steps of a man who understood that life is not just about vows and ceremonies, but about honoring the things unseen in wedding photos. He came to stand before Harold, extended his hand earnestly, and spoke in a voice that was warm, strong, and deeply respectful. Sir, if you don't mind, I'd be honored if you would walk Claire down the aisle. I can't think of anyone more worthy to do that today. Harold froze. For a moment, his entire body stilled, as if some long-buried part of himself had just been summoned back to life. He looked stunned, uncertain, like a man struggling to believe he was truly being invited into something so sacred, so full of meaning. Claire turned to him, tears now freely rolling down her cheeks. She nodded softly and whispered, "Please. I've never asked anyone to walk me into happiness before, but today, I want it to be you." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rising, swelling like a wave. From the front rows to the very back, people began clapping, not out of politeness, but because they knew they were witnessing something rare, something redemptive. This wasn't tradition. This was rebirth. This was Harold Jennings, once a war hero, once a broken man who believed he had nothing left to offer, now being asked by the woman who had unknowingly saved him to walk her into the next chapter of her life. Harold gave a slow nod. It wasn't dramatic, but it was full of resolve. He extended his arm, and for the first time in many years, he didn't walk with his head down in shame. He held his shoulders back. He stood tall. And he stepped forward with Claire, side by side, as every guest watched through tear-filled eyes. 12 Marines formed an honor guard on either side of the aisle. As the bride and the man who had once been forgotten passed between them, each Marine lifted a hand in solemn salute. a military tribute not just to a fellow soldier, but to a man reborn. The ceremony itself took place in an unusual quiet, not because music was missing, but because hearts were too full to leave space for anything else. No one thought of wedding programs, of bouquets or cakes. They were witnessing something far more rare than a perfect wedding. Gratitude repaid with grace. A gift that could not be wrapped, handed, or spoken. A gift given through presence, through redemption. After the ceremony, as guests began to file out toward the reception hall, Harold reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to Claire. "This," he said softly, "is all I have to give. I don't have much, but I've kept this, always, just for you." Claire opened the envelope, and her heart nearly melted. Inside was an old, faded photograph. In it, a young soldier sat in a makeshift tent, holding a broken piece of bread and a scrap of paper that read, "You matter. Someone sees you." Below the photo, scribbled in crooked, uneven handwriting, was a caption. "Years ago, someone used to leave bread and notes for me. I never knew who, but now I understand. Small acts can carry a soul through survival." Claire threw her arms around him, wordless. That photo, it was more than a keepsake. It was a message across time, passed from a stranger to a wounded soldier, from one survivor to another, until it came full circle to her. The baker who, without knowing, had written the next chapter of a story that had begun long before her. Jake stood beside them, placing a steady hand on both their shoulders. "I think," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "this is the greatest wedding gift we could ever receive. Not money, not a new house, but a memory, one no one would ever want to forget." Claire nodded, turning to Jake with eyes still glistening. She was crying, yes, but within those tears was a light, a quiet radiance that only emerges when a person realizes the smallest acts can change the course of a life. And in this case, not just one life, but many. After the wedding, people kept talking about the ceremony, not because of the flowers or the cake or the music, but because of what had happened in that sacred space. They called it one of the most beautiful and unexpected moments they had ever witnessed. Not for its extravagance, but because it had reached something deeper than elegance. Something that stirred the oldest parts of the human heart. Compassion, redemption, and the power of small acts. Claire and Jake never went to Europe for their honeymoon, as they had once planned. Instead, they took every dollar from their wedding gifts and started a project called The Quiet Corner, a breakfast program for homeless veterans in Albany. The idea came from those many quiet mornings when Claire had left pastries and coffee for a man no one saw. But this time, she wouldn't do it alone. They rented a small house at the end of Ashbury Street and renovated it into a simple gathering place. There were wooden tables, a bookshelf filled with paperbacks and old military biographies, a self-serve coffee bar that never ran cold, and a wooden sign above the door that read, "To feed one soul is to save a life." Harold never returned to the quiet corner after the wedding, but every month Claire received a postcard. Each one came from a different city: Denver, Austin, Chicago. None of them said much, just one simple line: "Every breakfast is a greeting. Thank you, Claire." One postcard from Seattle said more. Harold wrote that he was finally receiving treatment through veteran benefits, the very benefits he had once refused. Thanks to the help of Captain Thomas and other Marines, he was reconnecting with the world, healing not just his body, but the part of his soul he thought had been lost for good. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Claire and Jake walked into the quiet corner as they always did, preparing the morning batch of raisin buns, checking coffee filters, wiping down tables. But that morning, something unforgettable happened. 12 Marines, the same men who had once walked in formation into St. Elmo's Church, stood at the entrance of the quiet corner in civilian clothes. Each held a single flower. They lined up, quiet, respectful. Captain Thomas stepped forward, laid his flower gently on the serving counter, and said, "We'll take shifts here. Not because of Harold, because of you. Because you reminded us what it means to serve, to make sure no one is left behind." Over time, the quiet corner became more than a place for breakfast. It became a meeting point for stories, from veterans who had once been lost, forgotten, or invisible. There they were called by name. They were greeted with kind eyes. Their stories were heard, even if they were messy, even if society had stopped listening long ago. On the wooden wall behind the counter hung 2 framed pieces. One was the note Harold had once written in pencil. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." Beneath it, in black ink, Claire had added her own words. "Everyone who sits here has a story worth hearing." On slow mornings, when the rain was heavy and volunteers were late, Claire would stand behind the counter alone, pouring coffee, remembering the 12 Marines who once raised their hands in salute. And that memory, just that, would be enough to keep her going. Because she knew, some acts don't need applause. They just need to continue. A pastry, a cup of coffee, a glance without judgment. Sometimes, that's all it takes to keep someone alive. Sometimes, a small act, like sharing a simple breakfast or offering a kind look, is enough to keep someone from falling into the abyss of being forgotten. We never truly know what someone has endured, what they've given up, or what they've sacrificed behind a quiet gaze. That's why kindness isn't something we do to be recognized. It's how we keep our own hearts open. Because one day, you might be the reason someone finds the strength to carry on, even if it's just because of a silent cup of coffee each morning. If this story touched your heart, hit like to help spread kindness. Share this video with someone you care about, as a quiet gift of hope. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories that reach the most beautiful parts of us all. And don't forget to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.